Welcome back to the Culture Base Podcast. I'm Dustin. He's Blake. It is officially March. We are closing in on the end of Q1, as they call it in the biz. I heard someone say that once. I don't really know what that means. I do know what it means. I'm just kidding. I couldn't pretend I was that dumb. I do know what Q1 means. It means the first quarter.
Good.
Of the game.
That's what it means. And that's somewhat true.
Yeah. No, I'm serious. I know what it means. We are pumped to be back with you today. We're going to talk. This is episode 34. We're going to talk about setting some boundaries in order to create this ideal team culture that we talk about so much. But before we get into that, I want to remind you that we're here to help leaders know what they're about, show where they're going, and develop a scalable team to get them there. If you hear nasalies sounds in my voice, it sounds like I'm holding my nose. It's because it's all clogged up in there. So
the sickness of the end of February.
A lot of neti pots going on in our house right now. Let me just say something. Neti pot, underrated.
Oh, yeah.
Underrated. It's very good. I'm a big endorser of it. I also hear this commercial all the time for something called Navage. It's like basically like an electric neti pot thing that you're supposed to like not do only when you're sick, but you're supposed to kind of like make it a part of like your regular like health care routine. So I don't know.
We're getting paid for these endorsements, everyone. Just like
this episode brought to you by Navage and the Neti Pot. So netipot.com. I don't know if that's what it is. You should check it out. Hey, since you're paying attention and it's still the early part of the episode where you haven't clicked off yet, we would love for you to leave a 5-star review if you're listening to this. 5-star rating and review on whatever audio podcast platform you're listening to it on. If you're watching on YouTube, hello there. We're so glad that you're here. We would love for you to hit the thumbs up button on this episode, and then also subscribe and ring the bell while you're there so that you'll be notified every time we drop new content throughout the week. We're dropping these full new episodes every single Tuesday. We got some clips and such coming on Thursdays with the occasional reel and shorts posted on Wednesdays. We're on the socials at all the different places. At the Culture Base, BASE, Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook. You can find us there. And if you're interested in having us discuss any of these topics with you or your team, you can go to theculturebase.com/strategy, or just go to theculturebase.com and click on the big strategy button. Hop on our calendar, and we'd love to chat with you about how we can come alongside you and help develop those scalable teams that you're obviously trying to develop, or else you wouldn't be listening or watching to this. But we're so glad that you are. So let's get on to today's topic, because Blake's got some really smart stuff to share with you. I'm going to just tell you right now. I've already looked over the notes. Life-changing. That's the promise. That's the promise I'm making today. Because I can already tell that Blake has Mondayed a little harder than I have due to the nostrils being clogged. So there's going to be a lot of Blake today. But we're okay with that because look at him. It's beautiful. All right. So, Blake, you know what? It's often misstated to get the best out of people, don't put them in a box. However, the reality is that the box or the boundaries help identify and define the playing field for us. You wouldn't give a football player a baseball bat, would you? Would you, Blake?
Maybe.
Yeah. Maybe if it was Q1, you would, but not in Q4. You're not. See what I did there? It's a callback. So why don't we set clear boundaries on our teams to help them win consistently? Let's talk about setting boundaries. What do you know about that, Blake?
Really important. Really. After you set me up to be this life-changing thing, I'm like,
that's why people tune in, because of this just epic tonnage of inspiration that just
on stage naked right now. This is not good. Thanks a lot for that.
If you're not watching on YouTube, he is not actually naked right now. Just want to make that clear.
Oh, the thing I think about boundaries, like when I hear people say boundaries the first time, what I usually hear are people get into this mindset of, yeah, but boundaries are so restrictive. They don't allow you to grow or be creative, or like as soon as you start doing that, you lose culture. And I could not disagree more.
Hmm.
I think boundaries are truly what show the art of creativity. I think that true creative does not come from absolute nothingness to absolute something. I think it's when you're put in parameters and issues and like when they had I don't even remember exactly what it was. I feel like it might have been Apollo 13 or 11, one of those. There was some issue going on, and what they had to do was come up with a solution to fix the problem, which was
13.
pretty catastrophic. And what they had to do was use only the materials they had within the spaceship, right?
Yeah.
First off, it would have just been brilliant creativity if they could have done this in NASA, period, with all the resources, because that's just crazy. But it goes a whole nother level when you understand that you have these parameters, these boundaries, these limitations, and you can make something great out of it. Okay.
Hmm.
To me, that's the pure art of creativity is when you do have boundaries, like even an empty canvas has the boundaries of the canvas, right? So
Yeah.
my mind thinks that you're not really going to get the creativity and the good solutions within your realm and within your business and your team unless you have boundaries in place. What are your thoughts on?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I talk about often as I'm coaching and consulting with creatives and creative teams is to let them know that, hey, uh, that the box, that we think people are so afraid to be put in is actually extremely helpful uh, to people. I think for us to understand where the playing field is helps us to play the game. To just kind of use that sports analogy again, but Sarah and I, my wife and I, recently, I'd surprised her with this date night that I was super excited about, and I took her to this place here. We're outside of Atlanta, so I took her to this place here in Atlanta called Splat Zone. Now, this is not a bungee
Nickelodeon?
jumping place where they cut the cord. This is, see what I did there? Splat. You know what I mean? It's not that. Um, this is a place where you get to go do some fun, creative painting, typically on a canvas. But there you can bring in shoes, you can bring in shirts, you can bring in all sorts of different things and paint it up. You can do a solo thing, or you can do a thing, with your partner, whatever the case may be. I'm trying to get this loaded up on the screen right now because I want to show you this picture. Actually, it will let me share the screen. Oh, this is on. Sharing screens is no, it's not gonna let me. I'm gonna just put it in post production and I'll show everybody. And right now, I'm just gonna show Blake because I want him to be able to see the craziness that is this place called the Splat Zone.
Oh,
Okay,
dang. You like fully
sorry, I'm trying
suit
to get
up.
my. There it is.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, so you fully suit up in this place, and you walk in, and there is paint everywhere. Um, so we got to put a canvas up on the wall and start going at it, and there were very few. And I mean, I wouldn't say there's very few. There's actually more instructions than I expected there to be in a place where it's meant to kind of have no boundaries. Like you just take this paint, and you just take the paint brush and you splatter it, and like you wave your arms all around, and you take the squirt bottle of paint and you just kind of act like you're in victory lane with champagne, and you just shake it all over the place, and this kind of stuff. And it turned out really really great. But there were moments where we were just so like, okay, this is our frame that we have. This is how we want to see it come across the frame. And so I think it just was a good picture for me to realize that even in a place with limitless boundaries,
Mhm.
we were still walking out of there with a 20 by 30 canvas. Does that
Yeah.
make sense? We
Yeah.
weren't
Oh, yeah.
we weren't we weren't taking everything with us. that got paint on it. We were still just taking the thing that we had to play with, the boundaries that we were given. And so, like Blake was saying, even empty canvas has those boundaries, and that's what we were able to experience. And so, I just thought it was a really good picture, kind of analogy to what we're talking about today in setting boundaries.
Yeah. Yeah, I think what's so important when setting boundaries is being a really good storyteller. Okay?
Mm,
Like being a person who knows how to say, here's why this boundary is in place. And finding creative ways or finding ways to make sure that that message continues to reach the ears of those who have to deal with said boundary. Because what it takes 7 times of hearing something before it actually sinks in. So you're like, oh, I told them once. Yeah, but it's repetitive. And so stories, I feel like stories can get to a point quicker than just telling someone something, right? Like
hmm
morals of stories hit harder than, hey, the points of this story you're going to hear are this, this, and this.
Yeah,
Watch Jan now go through this maze and figure out those points. No,
yeah. There's a reason why the most effective communicators in the world
yeah,
share stories or parables or examples or real life examples.
exactly. So what I would say is figure out a way to share stories about why these boundaries exist. Because, and as we kind of jump into what boundaries we should create in an ideal culture, like as we get into this, the first thing I want to say is that boundaries are a kindness to your team. Okay. They may not see it that way, but I'm
Mm,
telling you that it seems like people can go down the wrong path with zero boundaries.
yeah,
Okay. So, for example, gosh, why do we got to do these expense reports? These are so stupid. Um, I'd rather hear that than figure out someone had, well, I didn't, yeah, I spent $20 on this and it was actually for home. And then all of a sudden it turns to 300. Then they've embezzled $1 million. Okay. That sounds stupid, but it's only stupid if you think it's stupid because that shit happens all the freaking time.
yeah,
That stuff is a daily occurrence. I know 5 to 10 business owner friends who have gone through someone stealing money from their company. And the people never think they're going to get caught because the
mm,
boundaries aren't there. And not just because there aren't boundaries, but the boundaries didn't help them never to start down that path. Okay?
yeah,
And I'm not like saying, well, so it's really your fault. No, they stole money. Okay? Like at the end of the day, it's on them too. But
yeah. But what you're
boundaries
saying
create
is,
kindness.
yeah, what you're saying is there's a shift, a mental shift that we need to kind of wrap our minds around and accept and embrace as leaders of culture. Is that the boundaries are a good thing? I think it's
Mhm.
one of those things where it's like, is it Richard Foster, Robert Foster, Celebration of Discipline?
Robert, yeah.
Um, Robert Foster, yeah, Robert Foster wrote this incredibly amazing book called The Celebration of Discipline, and then he's just like, hey, people think about discipline as being this really horrible thing, but it's actually a really great thing. And so, in the same way that he was able to kind of flip that on its head, you need to understand that boundaries are a kindness. It's no different than if you're driving, somewhere on the West Coast with a steep cliff off to one side of your vehicle and there's a guardrail there. You wouldn't be like, how dare this guardrail tell me where I can and cannot drive?
Yep.
No, you'd be like, thank God that's there because I
Yeah.
am scared to death and it might, for no reason, I may just jerk this thing off to the left. And if I do, I need that guardrail to be there to stop me
Yeah,
from making a really dumb mistake. Like
for
that's what
sure.
boundaries are for. I think we just need to make that mental shift in our head of, hey, boundaries good, not
Yeah.
bad.
Yeah. And you're right. It was Richard Foster, by the way. I looked it up. I said it so confident. I was like, oh, it's Robert. It's Richard. That's his.
I always say Robert, and then I would go, and then I find out later that it was Richard, and then I go, yep. So in my mind, I was like, this time I'm getting it right, and then you were like, no, you're not, and now it's back to me being right again,
Yep.
which I enjoy. Go ahead,
Alone in Wrightsville. Um,
property.
so kind of going back to like what boundaries are healthy to set in an ideal culture. First off, if you have no reason for the boundary you're setting and there's no like it's process driven or hey, it's to protect you from this, like you may want to question the boundary. Like you don't want to just have red tape to have red tape, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
We're not the
those
U.S., but
create bottlenecks and it's not good. What'd you say?
I said, we're not the U.S. government.
Oh, bam.
Burn, roasted. Just kidding. They're great.
They're excellent. USA. You.
We're getting shut down. Enjoy the podcast, everybody.
So some of those boundaries before we get censored. Um, Work to home boundaries, especially in your culture of like having healthy work environment. It's got to be that you're not always infringing into their time that they should be investing into their family, into other hobbies. They should be investing into purposes outside of the organization. Good cultures know that the rest and restoration, and in order to have longevity within their team, people have got to feel the ability to to be able to live in both places, right? And to live efficiently in both places.
Yeah. I think one of the greatest things I've ever heard about this whole work home boundary, or as people often refer to it as a work life balance, which is always funny to me because I'm just like, you spend most of your life doing the work that you're doing. So, what I know what you're trying to say is a
Mm,
work home kind of, professional life, personal life boundary. I know that's not what you're meaning, but I think we need to rephrase. I think we need to retitle this whole work life balance thing, Majigger. But the best advice I ever heard on whole work life balance on this is that it's a lie. That you can't have, and this is just my opinion. You can totally disagree with me here, Blake, but I've bought into it. I do think it's a lie. I do think work life balance is a lie. I think there are seasons in which you need to lean into
yep.
one over the other, and you need to be fully present in that season.
Mm,
In our house, we call them rhythms, right? There are different
that's good.
rhythms and things that are ebbing and flowing constantly. And so, like this week, we're all got the head cold kind of congestion thing going on. I'm not going to be like, well, you know, I'm part of this 5 a.m. club. We got to get up and get after it and sit in a tub of ice. Like that's not just not going to happen this
Yeah.
past week because we can barely breathe.
Yep.
And so it's just like, okay, well, that's the balance that needs to exist is the grace that you need to have on yourself and your team, and the grace that you need to understand that, hey, in this moment, in this season, this week, this day, whatever, really what needs the most attention
Mm,
is is my family, or really what needs the most attention is this project. And I think our families, as long as we are open and honest about that, will respect that. Okay, yes, mom or dad may have to work 60 hours this week, but I know last week they only worked 20 because there was something that was really important going on here at home and they needed to be present for.
yeah.
So that's what I'm saying. Like, I don't really think the whole work life balance thing in the way that I think most people think they want to give 100% to each.
Mm-hmm.
You can't.
Mm,
You just can't. You can't give 100% to work and 100% to your personal life.
yeah.
Something is going to give. So that's where grace and seasons and rhythms kind of come into. That's
Yeah.
my that's my stump speech
Yeah.
when it comes to work life balance. I'll hang up and
Yeah,
listen.
I think it's a you can't give 100% quantity to each. You can give 100% presence to
Hmm.
each. And I think that's where balancing is. Like the idea of a balanced, like we got there is not real. Like there are like you talk about those rhythms or those seasons, like I see that as like the balancing scale. Like
Yeah.
there's a time that one's getting heavier and we need to balance out, and then it's like you're
Mhm.
constantly adjusting. And it's not like, sometimes you're right, you just got to lean into where you're at, where your feet are at in that moment. You got to be there, but then you've got to be ready that, hey, because I'm balancing so hard here right now, there needs to be a season of really making sure the other side's okay too, and that
That's
I'm
right.
taking care of this thing. And I think I don't even know that people, because I've tried to have that balance where you have X amount of this and X amount of this and X amount of this, and all I do is feel stretched, which is opposite. Like, because I'm not spending a vast amount of time in any one said thing. I'm just like jumping from thing to thing to thing, and there's no good flow of green. So, um, yeah. So anyway, I think the next thing, when you think about like what other boundaries to set, I think you got to have cultural core value type of boundaries. These are the things that are like not acceptable. The stuff that like, one of our things that we talk about as a construction based company is uh, we just don't want assholes. We don't want assholes on our team. Like, and our industry is full of them. And so it's easy to be like, oh man, but they're an excellent electrician. But you know what? I've also heard that they chew people out for not doing it their specific way and then blah, blah, blah. And you're like, ooh, do we want to take them? The answer is no, because we want to have a standard of core values that we're not assholes, that we can say hard things, but we can also care about other people at the same time. And we also can value other people at the same time. So this is where you really want to dive into like what's acceptable, but more importantly, in these boundaries, sometimes I think what acceptable isn't as clear as what's not acceptable. And I think that's when you can say, in a boundary, you ever go up to a client and you just start cussing them out and telling them off? That's a clear no. Like we don't respond that way to people. And if anyone's ever doing that to you, you don't have to stand for that. So step out of that situation. But don't go and try to fight the situation either. Like there are standards we've got that we just won't do those things.
Hmm.
And so sometimes I think boundaries are more definable by what you don't instead of what you do, which I know sounds contrary to what a lot of people want to talk about in this field of like self-help and all this stuff, because it's what you stand for, it's not what you don't. Well, sometimes you're defined by what you don't stand for, and it's clearer that way. So sometimes I think the stories can unfold better that way.
Hmm.
Um, Another boundary that I think is important is letting people, and I'm going to use this word, earn autonomy. Okay. So this is a don't step, maybe not stepping on the toes of their process and how they're going about something, as long as they're hitting the results that you have set for them to get. Okay. So if you're trying to micromanage every aspect of them, that can be a boundary infringement, especially if you said, hey, all that's important is we get this result. And as long as you're not hitting the bad core value things and you're getting
Mhm.
that result, we're great. But then they start doing that thing and you're worried. So you step in and you're like, whoa, what am I going to do? How can I help? And you need to do this and do this. And then they don't feel this sense of autonomy. I think they got to earn that, right? They got to show time and time again that they can do it, but they need the freedom to do that. It's like the hovering parent who doesn't let their kid ever experience the flexibility and experience like kids need to kind of stretch outside of boundary lines sometime to get to know, oh, I don't do that. Like,
Yeah.
oh, don't touch that hot thing. Don't touch that hot thing. You know what? I'm sorry. Sometimes they got to touch the damn hot thing. And when they do, they're going to say, ouch. And that's going to teach better. I think
Hmm.
we can kind of gauge that at times. I'm obviously not telling you turn on every hot surface in your household and let your toddlers run amok. I'm not saying that, but there are times that you can teach through pain too. Um, but let them earn autonomy too. Don't be like, oh, you screwed it up one time, so how are you going to do it this next time? Well, you haven't allowed a solid boundary to be formed there.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
You have anything on that?
Yeah, I was gonna say it's. I mean, it's a popular proverb. That pain is the greatest teacher, right? And it's not necessarily. I don't. I think at the root of that, it's the experience is the greatest teacher.
Mm-hmm.
It's not necessarily that pain. I mean, I think joy can equally be a
Sure.
great teacher. It's the experience of having to go through it yourself. And I think that's what we're saying here when we're saying let people earn that autonomy. The boundary is that you don't get full autonomy on day one. That's the boundary, right? There's time and place, and there's opportunity that we create in our culture of this company for you to be able to earn that autonomy. And it's very intentional so that you can get the autonomy that everybody wants.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Um, Similar to what we were saying on why stories are important. Stories are important if you can get to the heart of why the thing is important. Okay, so this is not like, don't just tell dumb stories. I know people who are like, I'm gonna get to this person. I'm gonna hit their heart here. I'm gonna tell them a story, and your story is like it's just the dumbest story. I'm gonna say it like that. You said a dumb story there, okay?
You wrote a
And then
bad
you're
song.
like, you get what I'm saying? You see the point? That guy's hand got chopped off because he didn't listen to what I said. You're like, well, that was stupid. Thanks for that story, friend. Um, get to the why of the story and the why these processes exist. And I think if you can get to those points quicker,
Yeah.
it's going, and you can continue to reiterate that to your team, it's going to make that boundary, it may be annoying. You're not going to always get away from something being annoying. I have tons of processes that our team has created that I've created that I hate. I hate the process because I don't always like following processes. But that's a me thing, okay? Like, doesn't mean the process isn't healthy. Doesn't mean the process doesn't serve the team and serve the collective goal.
Hmm.
But if I can understand it, at least I can say, I hate doing this, but I get it. I hate it.
Yeah.
It's stupid. But if I don't do this, I'm going to add so much more work to my project managers, my field supervisor. I'm going to add so much more work that was so unnecessary because I didn't just follow the dumb process. Right.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's about serving others, not serving yourself.
Right. And Blake, there's obviously a shift here that we need to make in the conversation too, because when we're talking about setting boundaries, specifically in how it affects our team culture, yes, there are organizational boundaries, professional boundaries that need to take place in order for us to get the kind of culture that we're trying to build. But there's also some personal boundaries, right? This is where culture really starts to take place, is these interpersonal relationships,
Yeah.
interpersonal office politics, if you will, like all these different things start to really kind of come into play. So, Blake, can you break down for us, how do we understand our team's personal boundaries and how does that affect
Yeah.
the culture that we're trying to build?
Yep. We talk about culture being a garden, do you dig it? And
Like a garden. Like a garden, you dig it?
um, it's not always clean cut. Different plants, different soils, different pH level, different carbon, different, all those things, they're all different. And you have to adjust to what you experience. So figuring out this one true, man, if you do these 5 things, and don't worry, they're an acronym. If you do these 5 things, you're for sure going to get it. And your people, they're just going to understand. You're going to respect their boundaries and they're going to respect yours. And shit's going to happen. That's not real. Okay. The reality is we hear those things and then we step into the ring and we get punched in the mouth and we're like, that's not what I was expecting. Okay. It's not clean cut. So being responsive and understanding how people work becomes really crucial. And so, like, figuring out their learning style. Boundaries sometimes aren't about your boundaries, it's sometimes about how do they learn. Okay, what's the parameters of what works, what doesn't work? Okay, this is a pretty pragmatic approach here. What's their communication style like? Are they a do they do better with text? Do they do better with email? Do they do better with a phone call? And oh yeah, but I hate phone calls because I got to get stuff done. Yeah, but sometimes if you don't do the phone call and take the 2 minutes for the phone call, even the 5 minutes because they want to talk for 3 extra minutes about unnecessary BS, then it takes 5 minutes. But if you text them or email them and they misunderstand and spend 2 hours into this thing and then develop the wrong thing and then come back to you, the frustration is going to be double, triple,
Hmm.
quadruple because the time invested is much more, right?
Yeah.
So understanding communication style, understanding their candor style, and this is something I
Mm,
don't think we talk a lot about, but how do they just clearly say what they're saying? Because it isn't always clear. Do they have a tendency to passive aggressiveness? Do they have a tendency to withhold until you ask? There are a lot of people, my friends, who will not speak until approached. This was
yeah.
especially in my coaching. As I was like doing a ton of these assessments and stuff, the one aha that I came up with was sometimes people have the greatest things, they're just waiting to be asked.
Mm,
Sometimes people have the deepest insights, they're just waiting to be asked. And I would say that it's probably over 70% of people that I
Yeah.
saw that was true. And I was like, oh my goodness, I had no clue this was the thing. Cause I'm not one of the people that has to be asked. I'm just going to say it, right? I'm very like, boom, shotgun and deal with it later. Everyone
Yeah.
else is smarter and they don't do that, right? So being able to ask the right questions with the right candor style, got to figure that out.
Yeah.
Um, how do they work with others? Oh, you have something with that?
Yeah, I was just gonna say on the candor style, this is something that even like in marriage that
Mm,
Sarah and I have talked about many times over the years. We'll celebrate 18 years of marriage this summer, and even still, we're working out kind of the communication styles and the candor. And it took me many years to realize. Probably only just started to really settle in for me about 2 years ago. That's how
mm.
dumb I am. It took me almost 16 years to figure it
Same.
out. But my wife, and she'll be the first. She's told this in counseling sessions as we're counseling other couples and stuff like that too. So I know I have the permission to say this, but she, anytime candor is required between the two of us, she will cry. 100%. She will cry. What I had to learn is that her crying was not a result of something that I did or said. It's just the way that she's able to be candid.
Yeah, right.
Part of her being candid is tears come out. So I think it's important, like Blake saying, to understand their candor style. Some people will get kind of like really uncomfortable and jokey, or they might get really sarcastic, or they might get really offensive. They might get really sad. They might get really angry. Like being able to understand that will open up a door of communication and even more so open up an understanding that's filled with grace as you're having these coaching sessions and these one-on-one sessions with your team members. And you need to have hard conversations. Okay, I see their candor style coming out. Totally great. Celebrate that. Yes, we're getting candid. Let's go. Let's get into it. Rather than being like I'm sorry, I didn't mean to make you cry, or
Yeah.
why are you so angry right now? Like just go,
And then you
I
try to
know that's
fix
true.
it.
And you
Yeah.
try to fix it, which
Yep.
we all know in marriage. Don't do that. No
Don't
one
do
wants that.
that.
How dare you?
Yeah.
Anyway, I just wanted to say that because
Oh, that's so good.
I think it's important for us to understand it and extend that grace to one another as we understand those styles of candor.
For sure. That's super good. I think some of the other aspects of like personal boundaries is how people work with others and how they don't like to work with others or like
Yeah.
and this one has a whole like cosmere around it of how that all works like interviews, right? You go into an interview and they're like, I'm a team player. I love working with people. And you're like, that's great because we got a lot of them. And then they come in and they're like, I don't really like working with people. I didn't know this was part of it. And this is new. And you're like, no, it's what? Gosh, where have you worked? That like yeah, I don't. Okay. So anyway, with that though, it's okay how people work or don't like working
Right.
or are creative or not creative with people. And I found this my creativity style actually isn't best around people, which is nuts. I've always thought it was. But like when I dive deep into creativity, I've it's like I'm very introverted. On a top level, like 30,000 foot view, I can kind of bounce things off with people. But when I get deep, I've got to go into like do not disturb mode in order to dig deep. And
Mhm.
some people that's I've even heard that people's extrovert introvert definition is not just how you recharge. I've heard that before. Like, oh, you recharge when you're around people, you recharge when you're by yourself. That's extroverted and introverted. But now I've also heard recently how you're creative and developing things is
Mhm.
defined by that too.
Yeah.
So like I can be and I think we get too much into that conversation of trying to define someone introverted or extroverted. The problem is at any given time, it doesn't matter if someone's introverted or extroverted. That moment is what matters. The moment
Mhm.
that you're in right now, if they're getting recharged or being creative because of the environment they're in, who cares? Right. But trying to understand the state of the person and before you kind of like push past a boundary is becomes pretty important there. And I feel
Yeah.
like like we all got a good lesson of this during COVID, right? Like think
Mhm.
remember back
Yeah.
to the dark days, okay? I know I'm taking us back to pure anxiety and
Too soon.
It's too soon. But anyway, like, just think about when you walked up to someone new during COVID because you remember it. Like before that, walking up to someone new, you probably don't. But during COVID, it was like you had to, within the way their eyes looked, because that's all you could see, right? The way their eyes looked, where their stance was on masks, social distancing, all the political aspects, what the words you said and didn't say. Like you had to work through all that in a split second by coming near to someone. And I'm not going into all that. I don't even care about the political aspect of this. I'm just saying, like, our brains got a good exercise, at least during that time,
Mm,
of
yeah.
how to understand boundaries at another level. And my worry is that we've maybe lost some of that, not all the stuff, but maybe we've lost the ability to walk up and start thinking that way again. Because it's important for us to walk up and be able to pick up on little nuances that are
Huge.
different to the situation. There
Yeah.
there are little nuance. Why did they, like, you come up and you're like, "Hey, Todd," and he's like, "Gosh," and you're like, "Whoa, why did you freak out like that?" If you don't pick up on that there might be something else in that moment that Todd's going through, and you're like, "You really been screwing up, Todd." Okay, well, you just didn't read the room on that one, friend.
It's always
Okay?
Todd.
It's always Todd. But in those moments, it's understanding those things so that you can be sensitive to boundaries. This
Yeah.
does not, and I gotta say one thing here, and Dustin, you can take over, but this doesn't mean we don't have great expectations. The
Hmm.
expectations are the boundaries of what we expect. Okay. There's nothing wrong with that. You can show grace, like Dustin was talking about, but you can have expectations and respect boundaries on both sides here.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, implicitly.
So yeah, Blake, I think just in summation and to kind of wrap up our conversation today, I think it's important for people to understand if there's a boundary that doesn't exist, but you feel like it does need to exist. A good indicator there is it already naturally kind of coming to a conflict?
Mhm.
Are there conflicts happening constantly within the same category that you're like, okay, we could easily clear this up and provide some clarity here if we just had a couple of boundaries in place. And so I think paying attention to those indicators within your team, in your coaching sessions, in your conflict resolutions, in your notes days, like all these different things will help you understand, okay, might be time for us to put a boundary in there, or might be time for us to edit and upgrade that boundary to be a little bit even more like to be even more clear than we originally intended it to be. So that's our time today for the setting boundaries. We are going next week to get into a similar topic about how to kind of nudge people along and how to get them to do things and how to really kind of like let's go, kind of thing without manipulating them. And so we're going to call it nudges, motivations, and manipulation. So that'll be next week, episode 35. I do want to point out one thing that Blake said in here as well. And I think it's probably going to be our first piece of like merch, whether it be a mug or a t-shirt or something. But he did say the phrase, "Don't worry, it's an acronym" at one point. And so I love that.
Oh, so
And I'm
funny.
going to figure out a way to get that on a hat or a t-shirt or something. So if you're interested in purchasing something that says, "Don't worry, it's an acronym," comment on this episode and you'll be our beta testers for that product. So until until next time, we'll talk to you on the Culture Base podcast.